Pokemon Stadium 2 is the classic Nintendo 64 battle simulator with 16 gym leaders, amazing minigames, and a 4-part stadium struggle that was finally released onto the Nintendo Switch Online. And with the game now being more accessible than ever, I figured it was about time to show you all how speedrunners broke Pokemon Stadium 2 using only rental Pokemon. Because much like Pokemon Stadium 1 on the Nintendo Switch, you're forced to use only rental Pokemon since you can't connect any of the Game Boy Color games to it like you could on the original Nintendo 64 version. And from what I can tell, this is a big problem for most players that aren't speedrunners. All because the rules for the speedrun state that you're not allowed to use Pokemon from your Game Boy cartridges on the main leaderboards, which actually adds a lot of strategy to how the games will be taken on in a speedrun setting, given the limitations of these rental Pokemon. One common pattern you'll notice with these rental Pokemon is how awful the movesets are for a lot of the fully evolved Pokemon. Just as an example, Dragonite, Typhlosion, and Gengar have access to these fantastically awful options, and they aren't the only Pokemon like this. Many of the final evolutions, pseudo-legendary, and legendary Pokemon have some nasty movesets too. Of course, not every fully evolved Pokemon is like this, but it's pretty rare to find a good one, which is why a lot of the time non-fully evolved Pokemon like Abra or Kadabra are chosen over fully evolved Pokemon like Alakazam. And it's easy to see why when you compare both movesets. But with more than 200 rental Pokemon to choose from, which ones contain the best movesets for speedrunning Pokemon Stadium 2? Well, that's a pretty stacked question with how many different Pokemon facilities there are in this game. So in order to narrow it down a little bit and make this video a reasonable length, let's focus on the most popular category, Gym Leader Castle Round 1. Inside of the Gym Leader Castle, you'll be facing all 16 Kanto and Johto gym leaders, or Team Rocket and Elite Four members, and the final boss, Red. This speedrun is typically done with a completed save file in order to face gym leaders in any order. And since the Kanto gym leaders are much tougher opponents than the Johto gym leaders, fighting the Kanto ones first will be much more efficient for a speedrun of Pokemon Stadium 2 Gym Leader Castle. Each of these gym leaders in the castle will need a dedicated team to take them on optimally, which is a pretty easy thing to put together since you can pre-register a bunch of teams before you take them on. As for the actual teams we'll choose for the speedrun, one such team on this list is this nearly monotype grass team with Zapdos on it in order to take on Misty. This team is essentially chosen in order to minimize the odds of Misty sending out Quagsire so that you can sweep her with Zapdos' electric moves. If Quagsire is ever chosen, that's an immediate reset. You'll also notice a pretty similar story with Brock as well, since Venusaur is the only Pokemon needed to KO 4 out of 6 of his Pokemon with a ×4 weakness to Giga Drain. If Pinsir or Fortress are ever chosen for his team, that is also an immediate reset. Of course, you could still try and win the battle if Brock or Misty bring these Pokemon, but the odds of these Pokemon not showing up in the first place is extremely worth resetting for this early on, since it saves so much time not seeing them in the first place. Luckily for speedrunners, gym leaders also have an ace Pokemon that they'll always bring to every single fight, which makes getting the most efficient team much easier with Misty, who always brings Starmie, and much easier for Brock, who always brings Onix. What's really interesting about this team choice system is that it's all based on this crazy algorithm that takes into account a ton of factors, like how your team of 6 will do against their team of 6, the damage you can do, the damage they can do, what every single move they have does or can do, like raise or lower stats, or status, and flinch you. It's seriously crazy just how much detail this game goes into just to counter you. But thanks to all these calculations, that becomes its biggest flaw, since all these calculations can be countered by your own calculations. But while countering teams is pretty important in this speedrun, there are other Pokemon chosen for other reasons. If you happen to look at every single one of these teams close enough, you might just notice one thing.
A massive explosion!
Almost every pre-made team contains at least one exploding Pokemon. because exploding moves are really dumb in older generations of Pokemon. Not only do they both have at least a 200 base power, but are a normal type move that halves the opponent's defense at the cost of your Pokemon's entire HP bar. But even with such a high cost, it becomes very worth the sacrifice, because these exploding moves are amazing against extremely bulky Pokemon, or to just get rid of an annoying lead Pokemon that your opponent might bring to the battle. Whitney, the Elite Four, and Red are fantastic examples of this, since they all have some pretty bulky Pokemon on their teams. However, the power that your opponent possesses can also be made into a weapon. How exactly? Well, let me introduce you to my favorite Pokemon of all time, Wobbuffet. Wobbuffet is a lovely, silly blob of fun that threatens many Nuzlockes with its Shadow Tag ability and moves like Mirror Coat and Counter. Both Mirror Coat and Counter do double the damage back to an opponent after a move is successfully used on them. And these two moves are especially ridiculous on Wobbuffet when you take into account its absolutely ridiculous HP stat. This boy just don't die to anything, and even when it does get close to dying, Destiny Bond is there to make sure that it'll take down an opponent alongside it fainting. But the strategies I've mentioned thus far aren't exclusive to just Wobbuffet or even some of the exploding Pokemon, because really weak Pokemon like Corsola become an extremely awesome tool when using Mirror Coat. Even Pokemon like the unevolved Haunter have enough power and speed to abuse its special attack just before taking down enemies that are about to KO it with Destiny Bond. But I'd argue the most powerful of these rental Pokemon is Voltorb, because this rental Voltorb has access to both self-destruct and Mirror Coat. And even with its mediocre stats, Voltorb typically survives Mirror Coats, then booms immediately afterwards, making it such a powerful weapon against the threats each of these gym leaders presents to us. And even with all these boomers, Mirror Coaters, and Destiny Bonders in our party, Speedrunners will still require some basic power to mow through the competition. This is where Pokemon like Abra, Kadabra, Jinx, Heracross, Fearow, Zapdos, Diglett, and Aerodactyl are needed for their powerful stab moves. But then there's trainers like Red. Not only does Red not have an ace Pokemon to make team countering easier, but he also has an extremely stacked team with some ridiculous items. So in order to beat him optimally, we're gonna need to use every move I've mentioned thus far against him, which makes the best team to use the team of Weezing, Wobbuffet, and Haunter. Now, to showcase just how amazing these three Pokemon are, I'll be using the team he brought against Werster's latest Stadium 2 world record as an example. During the battle against Werster, Red brought the team of Typhlosion, Feraligatr, and Tauros, which is the most likely team he'll bring against you, sitting at about 42.19% odds. And all that's needed to beat it are Weezing's self-destruct on Typhlosion, Wobbuffet's counter for Tauros's insane move pool, and a Destiny Bond from either Haunter or Wobbuffet for Red's Feraligatr. Of course, this is only one scenario out of 8 for speedrunners, which might be completely different for you depending on the team you choose to bring. And for those who want to try this team countering stuff for yourself, look no further than Generic Mad Scientist Stadium 2 AI Manipulator. Generic Mad Scientist deserves all the love for taking the time to painstakingly figure all this stuff out. So if you want to do them a service, definitely try it out for yourself. And while you're at it, consider subscribing for more Pokemon speedrunning news and content.